I know we've received a lot of like conflicting information over,
Mhm.
I don't know, over the course of the past few months. Would you be able to break down what the current situation is in terms of like,
Well, to me, I mean, it's tragic because I still consider Sarah a friend. I campaigned for Sarah in Hamilton when I had my previous role for the province as the provincial critic for persons with disabilities and for seniors. We worked closely together. But I think, if Sarah were on this call, she might say that she disagrees with the policy that we've taken and how we've articulated our support for a ceasefire. It hasn't been strong enough, perhaps. The big concern I have is that these disagreements and debates have never actually been had out in the light of day in our caucus meeting. We've been exchanging messages on social media, and that's the frustrating part because I'm proud of the position we've taken as a party to call for peace. On October 11th, we called for a ceasefire. We called for the release of all the hostages. Heather McPherson, who is our foreign affairs critic for the federal party, has even sponsored a petition, an online petition, which you can find if you look up her social media accounts, for an arms embargo for any shipments going from Canada to Israel. That's by far and away the most progressive set of proposals by any English-speaking party in North America that I'm familiar with. That's my opinion, but I can understand, MPP Jama maybe feel differently. In the days after the horrific events of October 7th, I think she wanted to talk about the legacy of Israeli colonialism in very strident terms. The bodies weren't even cold in Israel, and it was very difficult for us to try to wade in on that particular strategy.
would you
We had set a federal.
would you argue that her speaking about that resulted in negative consequences that maybe wouldn't have been there had it been a separate issue, or maybe wouldn't have been there had, I don't know, had the timeline been different, or if it weren't so deeply rooted in settler colonialism?
So what I would say, Shailee, is this. I'm an organizer, first and foremost. For 30 years, I've been interested in organizing in social movements for peace. And what I think MPP Jama did as I said, the bodies weren't even cold in Israel. And families that I was in contact with, even here in Ottawa Centre, were in abject states of horror and grieving. One can understand that people are feeling that way. And the focus in MPP Jama's early statements was not conducive to building a broad peace movement that can bring as big a movement as possible to bear on Prime Minister Trudeau to declare a ceasefire, the path of peace. I think it was speech that was not. It wasn't factual. These were things that have been said in international human rights reports. But if one thinks as an organizer about how you make change, it's not by making statements on Twitter. It's by bringing people together. It's by organizing with our neighbors, and that's often the case of bringing in a diversity of people to the table. So no one is denying the legacy of settler colonialism in our country or anywhere else in the world. It's important. But I honestly think we could have gotten our own prime minister to declare a ceasefire weeks earlier if we spent less time fighting each other on social media and more time unifying behind a message that millions of Canadians could get behind. So I mean, MPP Jama will have to answer for herself insofar as why she felt the need to push further than what our federal policy is. I'm very proud of what the policy is. And hey, if we're asking for a peace process between Israelis and Palestinians, there can be a peace process between New Democrats, and maybe one day we could be in the same caucus again. But when you're working together on issues as controversial and challenging as this, we have to stick together. And if we have differences of opinion, we have to express those amongst ourselves and not exchange comments on social media. It went on for weeks.
So for the provincial NDP, what is that kind of channel of expressing disagreements within a party in a healthy and professional way? What does that kind of look like specifically in this context?
Great question. So in the caucus, people are, as long as we say it with respect. I can tell you, I've been in many heated caucus meetings in my 5 years being a politician. I've had to say things in that room that have been controversial because it's what I believe in my heart needed to be said, or someone in the community I serve has said, Joel, you need to go and you need to fight for this. That's the obligation I have in that caucus meeting. And again, MPP Jama never did that. That's the unfortunate thing. She'll have her own reasons for that. I'm not going to justify or unjustify that. I'm just letting you know that never happened. But as an NDP member, NDP members have every right to advocate for within our party for whatever cause they want. And there's a diversity of opinion amongst NDP members on everything under the sun, including Israel-Palestine. You won't be shocked to hear. But I think our federal policy is very reflective of where we're at. Like, we don't make an exception for Palestinian human rights, and too many people in our country do. Too many people in our country are happy to advocate for human rights for everyone except Palestinians, where if you raise it, one is immediately accused of hating their Jewish neighbors, which has been a deterrent to advocating for Palestinian human rights. But a lot of people in my party, I would like to think I'm one of them, have not been dissuaded by that. So our federal policy, I think, reflects where we're at. But if members want it to be even better, then they can get involved and they can improve it. I can tell you, at our most recent provincial council meeting, there was a resolution brought to the floor of that convention from MPP Jama's community of Hamilton, criticizing the leadership for the removal of MPP Jama for caucus and asking for MPP Jama to be brought back in. That failed by a factor of 2-1. But it didn't fail by a factor of 2-1 because people don't support Palestinian human rights. It failed by a factor of 2-1 because there was a recognition that despite one can criticize certainly aspects of how this matter was handled, it was certainly not easy. It's one of the toughest moments I've seen in my time as a politician. But I can certainly say, people want to fight for everyone's human rights. There's nobody in the room who will disagree on that. They will disagree on how the accent is put on where and what words are used and who we bring around the table and how we push for change and all that sort of stuff. But that's what the party spoke very clearly. And our leader, Marit Stiles, who herself grew up as a human rights activist, very active with South African anti-apartheid work as a graduate student. That's where we have similar friends in common from that era of her life and mine. She publicly acknowledged in the meeting that a lot of what happened in that moment could have been handled better. Words that were used from her standpoint could have been different. And I believe I certainly can tell you, anybody with concerns who I know in Ottawa, who I've referred to March, she's spoken to. So this is a moment where I think we have to keep the focus on what really matters, and that's Palestinian human rights, that's Israeli human rights, that's everybody's human rights. And moving past, as you said, legacies of colonialism to legacies of how we can actually create hope and opportunity for people.
So in terms of, as you said, there was ways in which the situation could have been handled better. What is kind of the key takeaway here when it comes to, God forbid a situation like that arise again in the future? What is like the key difference in terms of action that you would like to see from the leadership?
Well, I think what I've said publicly is that it's unfortunate that on the same day that Doug Ford was moving a motion of censure against MPP Jama, which I still find unbelievable that someone can move a motion of censure against somebody for their speech on Palestinian human rights. It still blows my mind. We are fighting that, by the way. The NDP is fighting that in the legislature. We will continue to fight that. But on that same day, when literally the vote was coming down, the decision was made to remove MPP Jama from caucus, and the timing was terrible, and the message that sent to the province and to the country was very bad. And I can understand why a lot of neighbors were really upset by that. A lot of neighbors who were not party to our internal discussions, to the internal process where we tried to mediate, we tried to reconcile between what MPP Jama wanted to say and what we as a party federally, provincially wanted to say. People aren't aware of all of that inside stuff. They're not. They just saw the moment of MPP Jama being removed from caucus, and a lot of people were very upset. So I've tried to talk to all those people and to listen and to make a commitment that we are mindful of how what we do on the outside is received, and how we make sure that we're not sending the message that we don't mean to send. That's for sure. We're certainly not on the same page as Doug Ford. Doug Ford is just out there to silence any opinions that he doesn't like, and that's not the way we operate as a party.
And a lot of people, I think, would argue that like it's a pattern when it comes to even Dr. Gus' situation with the CMA of speaking out against this horrific like issue that is going on. It parallels MPP Jama in a lot of people's eyes of, there being severe negative consequences around that. Would you agree that that's a pattern and that it's happening to other spaces in politics in Canada?
I'll disagree with you there, Shailee, because I have spoken in the House out for Palestine. I've spoken out for Palestine. I've used the words apartheid. I've used any of the words that MPP Jama has used, and I have not been removed from caucus. That's never been an issue. But when I had disagreements, and believe me, I did, I went to caucus and I argued them. And I insisted that we needed to take a different direction. This isn't the first moment, as I'm sure you know, when Palestinian human rights have been on the top stage for the world. There have been many moments in my 5 years as a politician, but when I had my opinions that were informed by people I love and work for here, I brought them into the room. I brought them into the room. And that's important. I believe that's how we grow as a community. So I wouldn't draw a correlation between what happened to Dr. Guh and what happened to MPP Jama. I would say I'm heartbroken in both cases. And I hope in both cases there's a resolution. I understood my last contact with Dr. Guh that he's decided not to go back to U of O. That's a huge loss for the U of O. That's a massive loss. This is someone who's already done a lot of good and will continue to do a lot of good. In MPP Jama's case, as I said before, like if there's a path in which she can one day be a colleague of ours again, that I would welcome that. I would welcome that. But a lot of work will need to be put into how we treat each other, even when it's really hard. Even when it's really hard, we have to focus on how we're talking to each other and how we're working with each other. Because as I said, I mean, this is by no means, I don't even want to use the word over. This is a moment. This is a moment in the world's awareness of human rights, and in particular Palestinian human rights. I've never heard it talked about more in my entire life, having followed Palestine for 25 years, never more than in the last 4 months. And what's happened is truly horrific. Truly horrific. And I know with MPP Jama, it hits her in her home. Her husband is Palestinian. She has fought on this issue for years, absolutely. But I think we are most effective in it's my own opinion, 52-year-old. I'm not trying to say I know everything, but just 52 years of experience. I think we're most effective when we're building a big, powerful movement for a completely different kind of world. And I think what the ICJ hinted at today in its provisional ruling is that international law is behind us. You can't get your freedom at someone else's expense. That's not the kind of world we live in, and I know there are elements of Israeli society that have said that. And when I went to graduate school with people from Palestine and from Israel, and people I'm in contact with who are in Israel have said it is extremely hard in that country right now to speak up against the war. Like what happened to Dr. Guh pales into comparison. Like people are literally being thrown in jail right now for speaking up against the war. There's a soldier whose name I forget, you could Google it and find it, but there's a soldier who's refusing to serve and starting a movement amongst Israeli soldiers to refuse service. And that's beautiful. That's exactly, we need more of that. And I salute Dr. Guh and I salute MPP Jama's efforts to want to raise the issue, but I think we have to think about in politics how we do the work. How we do the work matters.
Thank you.